Bibek Debroy is fast emerging as one of the key economists on whom the new government relies on for policy advice. A professor at the Centre for Policy Research since 2007, Dr. Debroy is an alumnus of Presidency College, Calcutta, Delhi School of Economics and Trinity College, Cambridge. Debroy was the economist the new government turned to when it wanted to revitalize Indian Railways. He heads a high-level committee to restructure Indian Railways, and his committee has just submitted its interim report. Dr. Debroy has also been appointed as member of the Niti Aayog, the National Institution for Transforming India, which is the replacement of the Planning Commission, as we all know, and will act as a think tank to the Government of India. He is obviously the man one needs to watch to know what the government will do on key issues. Thank you, Dr. Debroy, for joining us on Indianomics. Before we get to the various issues related to the railways and the Niti Aayog, your word on the economy itself. Will growth this year be at all better than last year? If yes, by how much? I'm asking you because the ongoing corporate results season is not very inspiring.
The answer is yes, but I think the right question to ask is by what extent has the growth recovery happened? Because partly implicit in your question is a value judgment about what is significant. And I'm not going to use specific GDP numbers because that depends on whether you're using the old series or the new series. But I think the increment to GDP growth will be of the order of 1% over last year. Is that enough? Of course not.
Well, actually, 1 percentage point better than last year is better than what the Reserve Bank or most other economists are forecasting. Where do you see this growth? Does it start in mining, in electricity, in manufacturing, services? Well, at least agriculture seems to be a washout.
Well, agriculture looks bad. But again, one of the problems with the sectoral composition is because of the new series has become an apples versus oranges comparison. So it's a bit difficult to pin it down in terms of our standard understanding of the sectors. So let me respond to it a little bit differently. Not agriculture, certainly, by the way. Let me respond to it a little bit differently. We still do not have any strong, robust evidence of investments having recovered. Essentially what has happened is a lot of projects, particularly road construction as the most obvious one, a lot of projects which are stuck in the pipeline, they have got unclogged. So the growth is primarily happening because of the unclogging. Hopefully the investments, new investments will begin to happen, but I would say that one has to wait for the data.
As I said, Dr. Debroy, you know, the ongoing corporate results season is still looking very bleak. So according to you, which might be the quarter when we will see the inflection in growth? In the first half, or do we have to wait until after the rains, say in the second half?
I think it can happen earlier. You see, part of my problem, as it is everyone else's problem, is that we still don't have a handle on this new GDP series. It's not robust enough. So we don't really have a fix on that. Having said that, with this new GDP series, I mean, it would sound very strange with the old GDP series, but I'd say with this new GDP series, it's actually some elements of manufacturing and some elements of services.
Well, Dr. Debroy, India Inc. frequently blames the low growth on high interest rates. Where do you stand on this issue? Are interest rates the biggest or even a big hurdle to growth?
Well, look, I think, firstly, I should say that all central banks are conservative. They are much more conservative than you and I are, and that's the nature of a central bank. Secondly, while I think interest rates need to be cut, I also think that the interest rate, which is really a price or a cost, is not as important as is commonly made out to be. It's a bit of a red herring. What I mean by that is it does not seem to be the case that people are willing to invest and cost is becoming a problem. There are problems with people not willing to invest. There are problems with people who are willing to invest not getting access to the formal credit market.
Well, speaking of inflation, one emerging red flag is the price of crude. They have inched up and now they have risen almost 25% from their 2015 lows. Would you worry that this can endanger our fiscal calculations or whether they may even endanger growth and inflation?
Well, there are different ways to respond to the crude figure. Firstly, the crude figure was some kind of correction was almost certain. The prices were simply too low to last. One historical angle of a crude price hike has been the impact it has on the balance of payments. That's no longer that important anymore. India is not what it used to be several decades ago. So it's not the balance of payments angle. The angle really is to what extent do you allow that domestic transmission to happen in terms of hikes in prices of petroleum products, particularly LPG and kerosene, and secondly, as you rightly said, the impact it has on the deficit. So I would say that the signs are that there's going to be some pressure on both these counts.
Well, let me come to the more pressing issue now of farm distress. I don't know if the Niti Aayog has been consulted on this, but I mean, I still can't see your website. But according to you, what are the triggers for this recent agrarian crisis and the spate of suicides?
Yeah, well, you're right that the Niti Aayog website isn't up. It will soon be up. And we have an internal workforce on agriculture and what needs to be done to reform Indian agriculture. But the deliberations of that, again, you're right, they're not up. Agriculture is a Pandora's box of all kinds of problems. Depends on how you look at it, because there's a long list pending for several years of pending reforms. Some of those have to do with expenditure, public expenditure as well as private expenditure, by which I mean investments. And one of the things that's happened is the investments are not happening, both public and private. The second part of it is linked to controls over production, control and distribution. We are talking about not only the output side, the tom-tommed APMC and the Essential Commodities Act, but also the input sides and the composition of public expenditure. We are talking about diversification of agriculture. So there's a whole bag of problems and solutions.
Yes, I agree farm distress is a many-sided problem, but according to you, what are, say, the hierarchy of solutions, the top 3 solutions, as it were?
Well, in the hierarchy of solutions, firstly one must realize that there is no real hierarchy of solutions, for the very simple reason that agriculture in India is extremely heterogeneous. So it is very dangerous to have a universal kind of template. What works for Punjab does not necessarily work for Kerala. What works for irrigated areas does not work for unirrigated dryland areas. What works for large land holdings does not work for small land holdings. Having said that, the essential issue is one of ensuring extension services, recognizing that many of the land holdings are subsistence level, recognizing that Indian agriculture has still not been opened up to the winds of change and liberalization in all of its different dimensions.
Again, I don't know if the Niti Aayog has been asked, but if you were asked, what will be your key recommendation to the government? I mean, is MSP increase, minimum support price increase, a key issue? Is it APMC reforms? What should be the key steps?
No, firstly, as I said, that there's a task force. The recommendations of the task force have not been implemented, so I'm reacting right now in my personal capacity. This is not a collective voice of Niti Aayog. Having said that, competition, yes, but if we expect that the APMC Act changes are like a magic wand, they aren't, because there are a whole lot of things that have to be done on the supply side. So one should not look for simple solutions. Yes, I do believe that the APMC should go. Does the APMC going in per se ensure that all of Indian agriculture is going to be reformed? Of course not. You mentioned the MSPs. But the point about the MSPs is that the MSPs are de facto procurement prices. They are not quite MSPs. And secondly, they completely distort price allocation because they don't extend to every commodity. So ideally, the MSP should not be there. They are there. There is a compulsion that they be there because essentially agricultural profitability has been squeezed.
Dr. Debroy, farm suicides is an issue on which one can't wait for reforms. Is there something the government can do to ameliorate the situation in the near term and in the medium term?
Well, you're asking actually two questions in one, because you began with the question of suicides. And I think one needs to recognize why these suicides are happening. The suicides are happening obviously because farmers have borrowed and are unable to repay. Who are the farmers who have borrowed? The farmers who have borrowed, and this is reflected in the suicides, are typically landholders, sometimes small landholders, who have borrowed because they have commercialized, they have diversified, and they have invested in farm machinery. Now, the moment you're commercializing, the moment you're diversifying, you are exposing yourself to risk and uncertainty. Once you do that, unless you're granting me the opportunities and the instruments to reduce that risk or uncertainty, you are causing problems for me. What I'm trying to flag is, so far as this limited aspect is concerned, there is a question of introducing a proper insurance scheme, which does not exist for agriculture today. So far as the broader thing is concerned, and flowing from what you've just said about farmer distress, one of the things we need to look at is lease markets. We talked about land ownership earlier, but land ownership may be contentious, land lease markets are not. Similarly, why should I have, as a farmer, why should I have to buy a tractor? Why can't I open up the leasing market for tractors and encourage it? So there are a whole lot of things that the government can do, governments can do, because some of this is state government, which enable essentially competition in various forms to come into agriculture. There's nothing wrong with that competition.
Okay, Dr. Debroy, now let me come to the Niti Aayog itself, and I have some very fundamental questions here since, the website is still awaited. What is the role of the Niti Aayog as you see it? Thanks to the Finance Commission, there are not too many centrally sponsored schemes left for the Aayog to oversee. So what exactly are the key functions or role of the Niti Aayog?
Well, there are central schemes, but you see, so far as Niti Aayog is concerned, there is an e-book that describes, e-book and hard copy also, that describes in detail what Niti Aayog's mandate is. Except that because we don't have a website yet, you'll only find it on the PMO website or the PIB website. Having said that, the Niti Aayog mandate has several different strands. So let me just pick on the one strand that you have mentioned. There are other strands also. I'm just ignoring those for the moment. There is an existing basket of government schemes. Some of those are central sector. In the budget, they are written down as central assistance. There are centrally sponsored ones. There are also state-level schemes. And there will always be a room for public expenditure. Our job is to work with that existing basket, see whether they need to be improved, see whether they need to be tweaked, see whether you need additional public expenditure programs. So one part of our existence is based on a review of the schemes, but not the only one.
Dr. Debroy, we need to take a break on this note, but we will be back with a lot more questions on a range of infrastructure sectors, notably railways and power.